I'm the curator of the exhibition Mirror Neurons, which is here at the National Glass Centre. It's part of the AV Festival, which is a festival of media art and film that's taking place across 3 cities. And the theme of the AV Festival is as slow as possible, or the idea of slowness. And here at the National Glass Centre, I have curated an exhibition which includes a range of media art, but is not entirely focused on the idea of slowness. It's rather focused on the idea of your sense of time, your own personal perception of time, and how long it might take you to realize that something is happening. So the works in the exhibition really invite you as a viewer to engage both mentally and sometimes physically with the works on view. And this is where the idea of mirror neurons comes in. It's an idea from neuroscience. And the mirror neuron is reported to be the neuron that fires when you recognize an activity, an action, and whether you imitate it or not. So for instance, you smile at a baby and the baby smiles back at you. Some neuroscientists believe that that is evidence of mirror neuron activity. Mirror neurons equally might not exist. They might just be one theory of the mind and of the brain, and we don't really know very much about how the brain works. I've taken the idea of the mirror neuron, I suppose, because I am interested in particularly media art that is in some way reactive to the presence of the viewer, and how when you encounter media art in a gallery setting, you might sort of stand back and watch somebody else interact with the work and then imitate or follow their interaction rather than actually engage yourself. John Thompson and Alison Craighead are British-based media artists. They work part of the time in London and part of the time in Scotland. And they are some of the more experienced artists in this exhibition in that they've been working with media technology and with the material of media for quite a long time in their practice. Their work often uses the internet and the web, and they often find material on the web and then repurpose that in how they create the work. So they are using found footage, found audio, found text, and then they're doing what they call making desktop documentaries. In this particular piece, Several Interruptions, it was a work that was originally made for the web, and particularly for Arts Council England's new website. And they wanted to make a work that invited you to interrupt your working day and watch a piece of art on your desktop in the browser window. And for this work, they have collected from YouTube videos of people holding their breath underwater. And then they've edited those videos together into the triptychs that you see. And the triptychs are kind of numbered and ordered. What I love about this work is that it's impossible to watch it without trying to hold your own breath. And so that idea of your physical reaction to the work is very present. Another work by Thompson and Craighead is Flipped Clock, which appears on the back wall here in the gallery. And Flipped Clock, again, like a lot of their work, is simply using the media technology that is available to us on our desktops. In this case, the clock of your own computer system. A lot of their work often takes the form of an instruction or an algorithm. In that way, it might be related to earlier conceptual art practices. Equally, it might be related to work that involves a chance. And so in this case, the instruction is that the numerals of the clock have been flipped. They've been rotated 180 degrees. And so the work is telling you the time. It is simply a computer-based clock, but it's disorienting enough to make you question how it works and what time it is. And it's a reminder that time is an artificially created construct. It's something that we have invented to regulate our own mental activities and physical activities, and actually has no real relevance to the more natural rhythms of our lives. Behind you, on this wall, and I'm not sure this is the best light to see this work in. This work is Michael Snow's film Wavelength, but this is the 2003 version of the film. It's called WVLNT, Wavelength for those who don't have the time, once 45 minutes, now 15. And it's a little more complicated to explain if you're not familiar with Michael Snow's original film Wavelength. Wavelength was a film he made in 1967, and it was a very important work of structuralist film at that time. It was filmed on 16mm film. The film takes 45 minutes, and in that 45 minutes, the shot slowly zooms in on a space between two windows in what seems to be an empty room. In the original film, there are a couple of events that happen. Somebody comes in, falls off the chair dead. Two other people come in, a radio plays in the background, somebody makes a phone call. And Michael Snow actually structured this film. He described it as a summation of his nervous system, but he structured it very formally. In order to film a 45-minute continuous zoom, he had to have tens and tens and tens of rolls of film, reels of film, and so he knew structurally exactly at what point the action would occur and at what point the zoom would be. Now, for this version, for the 2003 version, he's performed not exactly a remix per se, but he has collapsed space and time. So he's taken the 45-minute film, he's cut it twice and superimposed it so that you have 15 minutes of the film. You are seeing the beginning, the middle, and the end all at the same time. You're seeing through the film, from the furthest away shot to the nearest shot. The soundtrack of the film is a rising sine wave, and so the original 67 version has a real crescendo about it and a tension about it in which you wonder what will happen. Will the camera change its direction? Will some other event occur? And it really inhabits your body somehow watching this film. It really directs your attention, and it's quite an immersive experience. So to have the collapsed 15-minute version is really spectacular here, because I think it addresses all of these questions of how we perceive space and how we perceive time, and how we think of film as a linear experience, and actually it can be cut up and collapsed and in some ways remixed, as we've seen with the Thompson and Craighead work. This is a work in two parts, as it were. And it's a piece by Scott Rogers, who is currently studying at the Glasgow School of Art in Scotland. And his practice is more as a sculptor or as an experimenter, as an inventor, as a maker of objects and situations. And this piece was produced here at the National Glass Centre, and it is based on a drawing by Robert Boyle, who was an Enlightenment-era chemist. And he was experimenting with gases and fluid mechanics, and this was, he drew this object, thinking of it as potentially a perpetual motion machine. It was called a self-flowing flask, the idea that you could put a fluid, a liquid, into this flask and it would continually flow. Now, of course, as soon as you try it, it doesn't work. The fluid stays completely level, but what Scott has done is he's worked with an animator to produce a very high quality virtual digital animation of the flask perfectly flowing. So you have the object with the potential, and then you have the virtual with the actual functioning. And so you're put in the middle, you're positioned within the middle to ascertain, could it work, how could it work? Is that actually it working? Oh no, that's an animation, that's a virtual representation of it working. So in this front gallery, through these 4 artworks, you have different examples of media processing, different examples of the use of media, from film to online video to digital media. And then you have in all of the works some implication of you and your body and your comprehension and understanding of the works. Whether you're holding your breath, you're trying to work out the time, you're trying to figure out if the flask could actually work. So in this gallery, which appears to be completely empty, is the work of the artist Simon Pope. And Simon Pope is a British artist, sometimes based in Canada and sometimes based here in the UK. And for a number of years, his work has been investigating the practice of walking and the practice of memory. And as I said earlier about the work of Thompson and Craighead, his work sometimes takes the form of an instruction. And so in this case, the instruction is to walk around the gallery and to nest within the space of this gallery your memory of another gallery space. So maybe Jenny and I will do that now, and you can follow us around. Do you have a gallery you remember?
I do have a gallery, actually, the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis. Last time I was home for a visit, they had a special exhibition of 20th century paintings. So you came into the space, and it was this beautiful big room with like purple carpets and a really kind of long gallery with high ceilings. And you walked through the entrance on the right-hand side. And then when you came in, all of the paintings were hung on one wall, sort of in that historical hang, different lengths, different heights. Yeah, it was really beautiful. And then there was a series of these purple pod things at different spaces throughout the floor, so you could sit and kind of just contemplate all of the wall hangings.
And was there natural light? Was there windows, or was?
I think there were some windows on the other side, just at the very top, so it was like a series of just really small ones, just near the ceiling. And then once you were done there was just a small doorway on the opposite side to exit out of.
So it was a much bigger space than this one.
It was much longer and much higher as well.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
So Simon Pope's practice, this particular work, was the result of a fellowship that he undertook with a psychologist named Von Bell. And what they were looking to do was figure out if they could combine an artistic and a scientific practice to come up with one experiment that could equally be performed in either domain. So Vaughan, as a psychologist, could use this experiment to treat patients who have amnesia or who have memory and traumatic head injury, brain injury problems. And Simon Pope could equally use this work in a gallery context to think about instruction-based work, gallery spaces, performance, walking, and so forth. So there's quite a lot of kind of scientific and artistic collaboration behind this piece, although it appears as an empty gallery, and it's really through that experience of talking with somebody else and creating a larger memory of a space within a smaller space that the work is realized and the work is completed. And the last piece we can talk about is Catherine Richards' piece, which we might have to talk about out here before we go into the dark space. And Catherine Richards is an artist based in Ottawa in Canada, and like Simon Pope, she has collaborated over a long period of time with scientists, particularly at the National Research Council of Canada. And Catherine Richards has made a number of works which deal with our sense of our bodies within mediated landscapes, within the kind of technological landscapes we inhabit. And she's very concerned about how our bodies are being plugged into these new systems, whether it's through our constant connection with our telephones or the fact that we are in front of screens all the time. And that these technological devices are electromagnetic. They do give off radiation, they give off radio waves, and that we are living in this very charged up environment, and we are literally plugging ourselves into it. Some of her work involves insulating us from those electromagnetic spectrums by wrapping ourselves in a copper blanket, which insulates you. Other of her work involves highlighting or showing that electromagnetic reaction and the fact that our bodies are electromagnetic to you. And that's what the work in this gallery does. It's called I Was Scared to Death, I Could Have Died of Joy. And it represents those two emotions of fear and euphoria or ecstasy, and how in both of those states you might feel haunted. So we're standing in a very darkened room, and in the room are two stainless steel tables, what are called clean tables, often used in scientific laboratories. And on each table is a glass cylinder or tube, and inside each glass cylinder is a life-size representation or model of half of a human brain and spinal column. And half of the brain is in the one test tube on one side and the other half in the other. And as you approach the table and approach the brain, the light goes out and photon gases fill the tube and start to pulse and send the signal of the pulse of the photon gases to the brain. And so this side, we're standing and we're looking at the side that represents fear. And so the pulsing, the pattern of the pulsing is in line with how your neurons fire when you are afraid. As you touch the glass, which you can gently rub your hands along the test tube, the gases rise to meet your fingers and they connect you to this circuit. So you feel not really much of a static charge, but a little bit of excitement or thrill from the photon gases running through the tube. The other table at the other end of the room is the one for joy and euphoria. And you'll see that the pattern that it pulses is very different to the one for fear. And if you stand between them, you feel this energy of being haunted by these two different states, of these two different emotional states. Interestingly, this one has a much lighter and more joyful color in the gas, and the pulsing of it, the rhythm of it, feels quite happy. When you talk to Catherine Richards, the artist, about the creation of this work, she describes, first of all, the experience of working with vacuum physicists at the National Research Council, and then working to get information from neuroscientists about mapping brain activity and how we could recognize a pattern of a firing neuron. But she talks more than that about this idea of visualizing the fact that we are electromagnetic bodies and we are not always aware of how we are plugging ourselves into these new media circuits, and that this visualization of it is designed to allow you to feel yourself placed between these two different emotions. So in the exhibition, I wanted to pair these two works, one by Simon Pope and one by Catherine Richards, because I wanted to both give visitors the physical experience of participating in a work, which Simon Pope's does, by inviting you to nest your memory of one space inside another. You know, it's really an instruction work. It's a key to you to participate in a kind of a program, almost an algorithm. You have to undertake the instruction. And then to pair that with Catherine Richards' work, which is a representation or a visualization of brain activity. It's something that we obviously have physical experience of, but we have no conscious knowledge of. We don't know what it looks like. We can't visualize it in that way. So it still demands of you, that work, for you to kind of be a little bit outside yourself. And by being able to reach in and touch the glass tubes and really connect yourself to that circuit and sort of feel the work reacting to you, I think it really demonstrates some of the ideas that are present within media art. To have those two works, which are in fact older works, Catherine Richards was made in the year 2000, and to be able to bring them together with works that are very recent, made just this year, or works that are older, like Michael Snow's Wavelength, but then remixed more recently, as it were, I think provides the opportunity to consider how artists are engaging with digital media across a range of formats, and also how artists engage in a research process and how their work takes the form of experimentation. And I think that's a really fundamental part of this exhibition. Another exhibition that I've curated for the National Glass Centre on behalf of the AV Festival, or to coincide with the AV Festival, is a new commission by a New York-based artist named Joe Winter. And Joe Winter is a sculptor and an object maker, but also somebody who's deeply interested in the history of technological devices and the history of media and histories of objects through which we might understand the world. His work often takes the form of very obvious kind of aesthetics from the office or the classroom, everyday aesthetics, you might say, beautifully crafted and quite conceptual. And Joe was invited to make a work specifically for this space. And this gallery is known as the Long Gallery. It's quite a long stretch in a very public part of the building. You're hearing the restaurant downstairs. And this part of the building gets a tremendous amount of sunlight, as you can see today, because the ceiling is fully glass. It's facing the river, facing the windows. And Joe had been making a series of works called A History of Light. And in that, he had been fading really quite low quality colored papers, fading this paper by applying both artificial and natural light to it. And so he proposed for this space what he thinks of as a kind of astronomical monument or a solar array. So we have a series of kind of obvious office equipment like they look a little bit like document inbox trays. And they're crafted by the artist with the brass knobs, and each one contains a different color of the spectrum. And Joe then worked with a glass artist here at the National Glass Centre, Kate Watkinson, and Kate worked with him to create glass sheets. And each sheet of glass has a different effect, a different texture, a different ripple, a different bubble within the glass. And so as the sunlight hits the glass, the rays of the sun are diffracted through the sheet onto the colored paper. So in the case of this purple one, you can see that the sunlight is hitting it and will create a striped pattern. And what Joe wants is for the images to both be created by the sunlight over time and equally to be destroyed by the sunlight over time, recognizing that unlike photography, where you might develop an image onto paper through a glass plate, but then you chemically fix it, in this case, that stage of chemical fixing has been withdrawn. And so the image is both created and destroyed within the same moment. It's in a continual state of flux. He designed the trays so that they could be angled and turned towards the light. He was very open in terms of the experimental process of the work to not necessarily dictate what kind of glass Kate might make or which kind of glass would appear on what color of paper. The Glass Centre gets a lot of sun, obviously, and is open to the public during daylight hours. But yet in the morning, before the gallery opens to the public, the sun rises on the other side of the river and is reflected off the water. And so this site gets a tremendous amount of daylight, and the exhibition runs until the 20th of May, so it's quite a long period of time to watch these images come and go. And so here on the bulletin boards, towards the end of the display, we're showing some of the prints that have resulted, and you can faintly see the stripes resulting from the sheet of glass on the purple pages at the end. But of course, as these images stay here on the bulletin boards, they will fade over time, as will the cork on the boards, and that is all an intrinsic part of this process for Joe. He'll be coming at the end of the month to give a talk about his work, and so maybe you'll be able to find out a little bit more about it then.